It's going.
Okay, so this is the second half of the morning session. It's Friday, January 5th, 2024, and we're resuming our work on S213 and are joined by Ms. Dave. Good morning, good to see you again.
Yeah,
So soon after our December 5th special meeting.
well, it's good to be here. Thank you for having me. And thank you for inviting me to speak about Bill S213. I'm Karina Daly. I'm a restoration ecologist with Vermont Natural Resources Council. I did bring a slideshow, so we have some pictures to look at today, just to spice things up. But I work as a restoration ecologist at the NRC, and in that role, my job is threefold. I work on the ground implementing river restoration projects, reconnecting rivers, removing dams, reconnecting floodplains, and restoring wetlands and riparian buffers. And I convene the Vermont Dam Task Force, which is a group of scientists, regulators, interested parties in dam removal, and we connect on the up-to-date science and process of dam removal. And then lastly, I get to work to support water policy in Vermont. So great to be here. And in the wake,
Senator White asked about it. I don't know if it's gonna be in your slideshow. At some point, I would love to double back as part of getting better educated. I realize I don't have very clear definitions in my head when we talk about a river corridor, a floodplain, an adjacent wetland. When does it become? There's like they're all interconnected, but I don't quite know how the boundaries are drawn and whether they're functional or geographic, or I don't know. So
perfect. And that's exactly what I was gonna say is sort of, I framed this testimony to sort of high level overview on watershed ecology and the benefits of freshwater systems for climate resilience. And then I was going to dive into the wetlands piece, what the concerns are currently with a bit about the science and definitions and what the concerns are, and then what we're proposing for policy. And then doing the same for the dam work. And then I was going to pass it to Lauren to speak to the river corridor piece.
Great.
Does that make sense?
Sure, and I know we'll come back to these things and get into more detail. Oh, and I left out riparian
Yes,
and riparian buffers.
very important.
Yeah.
So thank you for asking that. And yes, so intact freshwater systems build climate resilience. That's my mantra. And I'm going to continue to repeat that throughout this, but it's really thinking about freshwater systems at the watershed scale. So thinking about the wetlands, the rivers, the river corridors, and the dams, what blocks those rivers. So it's thinking beyond our lakes to our headwaters and how our headwaters connect to our lakes and everything in between. Healthy, intact freshwater systems build climate resilience. We need to stop thinking about our rivers as a resource that we can control, and we need to think about restoring their natural function. The Vermont Climate Action Plan, the State Hazard Mitigation Plan, the Lake Champlain TMDL all address these concepts to promote healthy connected river corridors, floodplains, and wetlands, protect the adaptive capacity of natural resources, sustain, restore, and enhance the health and function of Vermont's land and water, shape land use and development that supports carbon sequestration and storage, climate resilience and adaptation, and natural and human communities, and increases flood resilience in the natural and built environment. So a fundamental concept of watershed science is thinking about our water systems in 4 dimensions. So not just the river flowing in 1 dimension, but thinking about the lateral connectivity of the river, the longitudinal connectivity of the river, the temporal and the vertical. So I love this diagram because it just is a concept of those different dimensions. But that longitudinal connectivity is what allows the river waters to flow freely downstream. And nutrients and sediment to move up and down that system as well as wildlife. And when you put a dam, for example, in a river, you block that longitudinal connectivity. So you put a barrier in that blocks that connectivity. That barrier can also block the lateral connectivity of the river system, so that river no longer has access to its floodplain, to its wetlands that slow that water down and clarify that water through filtration. So there's the lateral connectivity, that longitudinal connectivity. And then the vertical connectivity is connecting the river with groundwater. So if we block our headwaters and disconnect our wetlands from our river systems, we are blocking the vertical connectivity of a river system. And we need that cold groundwater in our river systems to keep our rivers healthy. And then the temporal dimension is that rivers shift over time, they change their dynamic. And they're constantly trying to find their equilibrium. And that's part of a river system, and we need to understand that. I think you can see that really clearly when you drive up Route 2 north of here, along the banks of Marshfield and Plainfield, and all the new sediment that was transported onto some of those farm fields. It's created new topography, and it's really, provided new soils to those fields and eroded other areas out. There's, old oxbows where there wasn't before. So that's part of this process. We need an improved statewide approach to protecting our watersheds for public safety, to reduce economic burden, to improve water quality and habitat diversity and community resilience. Public safety right now, and I think Lauren mentioned this in her testimony earlier in December, is we have a lot of our it's inequitable at this point, the amount of people that we have living in floodplains, trailer parks, and we need to improve that equitability. And we need to get those people out of the floodplain. It does not make economic sense to have them there, and we need to address that. So that in itself is a huge public safety issue. And this picture shows a bridge in Marshfield that was badly damaged, but the economic burden of just the infrastructure replacements again and again, rebuilding in these storms is tremendous. And we need to start thinking about water quality and habitat diversity as part of community resilience. And if we, so when we are, thinking about river systems and freshwater systems, we need to think of it on the scale of protecting for the sake of clean water for all of us, for public health, and for our community resilience for the future. What type of habitat we will have, and allowing as much habitat as we can.
You made a good question. So
Yeah.
is the main water quality impact for river management all the sediment that gets moved around, or I don't know, just trying to,
Yeah.
is it sediment or debris that's picked up, or?
So related to flooding.
Yeah, I'm wondering, like, I was thinking about water quality work and things oriented to trying to mitigate pollution. And I don't know if, in a way, if you think about sediments that are mobilized by the raging river as a form of pollution.
They can be, certainly, and there's, ways that we need to think about dealing with that sediment when it is contaminated. When it's not contaminated, we do need to recognize that that is part of river process, that sediment moves and it rebuilds banks, it provides, below dams, you can have sediment starved reaches, which are areas that have not had access to sediment because the dam has blocked that. And when you, and that sediment starvation causes like habitat loss and a lower biodiversity because you just don't have the soil enrichment that would happen with a natural river process, destroying that natural process.
As one dam has reduced the fertility of the lower Nile.
But, and we also need to think about water quality as it relates to temperature, and that's something I think we tend to overlook, but. When we have an impoundment in a river system, we have a drastic temperature change behind that dam, or we can, depending on the dam. And we need that cold, clean water, so connecting that longitudinal connectivity and that vertical connectivity to ultimately keep the health of our lakes and our rivers healthy, so we need that.
So
Impoundment makes higher temperatures.
Yeah, it depends on, not all dams create higher temperatures behind them, but if the impoundment size is large and it's holding water back,
Yeah,
it does.
thank you.
Yeah. So then just going into wetland science a bit. Wetlands are those areas where land and water intersect. And the Clean Water Act was enacted to protect and preserve the functions wetlands provide to society at large. And I think that we need to be thinking about a net gain of wetlands, leaving wetlands in a better place for people and nature for the future. And not thinking about just like trying not to reduce wetlands, but how can we, like, we have this huge historic loss of wetlands. I think it's over 35% of Vermont's wetlands since European colonization have been impacted. And that's like, even that data is really not clear because we don't have a strong baseline of how many wetlands we have out there. So not clearly mapped, so I'll go into that later. But so thinking about that net gain of wetlands for the future and leaving the planet in a better state.
Sorry, what?
Okay, so. I mean, the net gain. That's. Basically to get back to pre-colonialization levels of wetlands, we need. To at least gain 30. Yeah,
Percentage.
yeah,
Yeah, that's in my head.
okay.
Yes. Yeah. And I just chose this photo on the slide because it's aerial imagery from the Vermont Natural Resources Atlas. And when you turn on the infrared layer, you can see the wetlands very clearly. And the river system, and that they're all connected and they are all part of the same water. So thinking about wetlands, and when you break, when you fracture a system of a wetland or a river, you break an artery and that function is broken. So really trying to leave these systems intact and connected is critical for climate resilience. In Vermont, we have 10 wetland functions and values, flood storage, water quality, fish habitat, wildlife habitat, exemplary natural communities, rare, threatened, and endangered species. Our wetlands are protected for education and research, for recreation and economics, for open space and erosion control. And these are the functions that, according to the Vermont wetland rules, we protect. And class 1 and class 2 wetlands. Excuse me, are considered significant because they provide at least one of these functions, if not multiple functions. Concerns about wetlands. We don't know enough about what we have, so we don't have enough data. Our lack of understanding of their characteristics, how they look on the landscape, forested wetlands versus field wetlands. leads to their demise. So we don't know enough to protect them, so we really need better data to map those wetlands, to identify them and have them as a baseline, so that we can actually track wetland gain. And then the physical destruction of the wetland function, so ultimately, development impacts. To wetland functions is a huge concern. And wanting to make sure that that restoration of the wetland function is done to its best ability. On site or near site where impact is proposed when it's absolutely necessary. The rate of loss is significant with wetlands, that 35% since European times. I also, there was some 2021 data from the Vermont Wetlands Program, so they issued their report. I've asked for the 22 report, so looking forward to getting that, but in 2021, they issued 221 permits. Which is a 32% increase from 2020, so that's a 32% increase from the previous year. That's pretty substantial as far as permit issues. So things are happening. I think I learned on WCAX just the other day that Vermont is the most moved to state the 3rd year in a row. So things are happening fast, so we do need this baseline to track our wetlands and the net gain policy to ensure that we're protecting them. As best we can. And capacity is the other thing, I think that we need to set up the Vermont Wetlands Program. With the support needed to provide the reporting, the tracking, the mapping that we're asking for. So I think Michael did a really good job leading us through the wetlands policy, but we're asking for that net gain of wetland acreage. And that those wetlands that are impacted from development are restored at that 2-to-1 ratio. And I can say I am a wetland scientist, I was a consulting wetland scientist in a past position. And for 10 years in Vermont. And in that time, I will say that the Vermont Wetlands Program has done an excellent job using the 2-to-1 ratio, if not even a higher ratio in many instances for wetland impacts for authorized permitted impacts. But we need to do a better job tracking that. And it would be nice to have that documented with this 2-to-1 ratio in statute.
Thank you. I think you may have just said this, but I'm not clear, how was the 2-to-1 ratio just agreed on? As opposed to a higher ratio or a lower?
Yeah, no, good question. So we worked, it was agreed on through those that worked in drafting the policy, the Water Caucus. And Vermont Law School, but we did some research comparing other states and what other states had. And also working with DEC and the Vermont Wetlands Program on what was recommended. And we are, like other states do have net gain policies where we are not alone in this. And 2-to-1 ratio is common, it's what we were already using. But certainly, there's opportunity there for it to be higher, should we want that. But we thought it was a good starting point.
I'm thinking aloud, in a way, some people worry when they hear about the net gain. But another way, I'm just starting to think about it, is net recovery.
Oh, I like that. Very
Versus net recovery. I mean, if you lost something, you want to recover it. Gain sounds like maybe something new.
I was, we turn that game being used in what context?
In terms of the kind of offsets that we're talking about for primary soils, to address the soils, same on.
I was like years ago when we talked about the 3rd year in a row of net gain of influx of the state out of 50 states in the union being
Yeah.
percentage wise the most influx, arriving influx of people.
Right.
and how that, we talk about affordable housing and what. And is that influx of people like a boon or a burden when it comes to housing Vermont's population and. Like, these things are all connected. It's an interesting fact. United Dan survey,
Sorry, what was that?
was that from the United Dan survey?
I don't know what it was from, other than I heard it on WCAX.
United moving vans
Oh,
reports where they move people from and where they move them to.
okay. Well, I'll have to check there.
It keeps up, tries to keep up with that between decades.
There went,
Thank you, Chair Brick. So I really like how you frame that with the net recovery. And one of the points that I wanted to check in on, but I wasn't necessarily gonna ask a question about, but since it came up. When we're dealing with global warming and climate change and the increase of extreme weather events and natural disasters, it feels like we actually might wanna have more wetlands than what we started with, even pre-colonization to. In a way, it's like you need more to counteract the already changing climate and the severity. Like how they've said that we need more, if you look outside of Louisiana, like they actually need more than they started with when it comes to their wetlands, their Everglades, like that, they actually need more.
Exactly.
Than even where they started. Is that something that is discussed at all? Not even just getting where we used to be, but how much we need to adapt to actually even respond to the change in our climate?
I think that's exactly true, and I think that that's how we need to think of it. And I will share, I think it's also in, the H30, which was the original wetland bill, but the Trumper Public Lands, they did a study. And that study showed that Vermont wetlands provided estimated $590 per acre annually in natural goods and services, such as flood protection, water quality, wildlife habitat. And that same study found that every dollar invested in conservation of our forests and wetlands was worth $9 in goods and services returned for Vermonters. So it's exactly that.
Obviously, the conservative economists of our state would say this is a great investment. If I were to hear them.
Yeah. And I think we need to think about investing in our natural resources. That's what this is.
Thank you.
Yeah. So other pieces of the policy is that high quality national wetlands inventory NWI mapping statewide. With a ground truthing component. So that's already started to happen. It was completed on the Missisquoi, for the Missisquoi. Last year, I believe, or maybe the year before. And there's been funding for the Connecticut, so the Northeast Kingdom, the Upper Connecticut. And I think there are plans now for the Otter Creek as well. So there are plans for this, and we need to make sure it follows through for the entire state. Because that's documenting what wetlands there are in Vermont, which at this point, we don't even have those clearly on a map. And that being said, wetlands change, they're dynamic, they can change over time. That's why delineations need to be updated every 5 years. So that Vermont significant wetlands inventory, the VSWI mapping would be updated annually. Separately from the NWI mapping, but that NWI mapping is also brought into the VSWI. And that VSIW mapping would start January 2025. So really important to get this mapping going and have the updates and have those updates regularly so that we can start tracking. And with that goes the wetland reporting. So we've asked for part of this policy would be that the EC provides a report to you and House Natural related to the status and trends of wetlands in the state, how many permits were issued, how many site visits, what lands. I know this question was asked about tile drains. So in that report, actually, it would be required that they provide at least what land was converted to cropland in that year from wetlands. And of that cropland, we would know whether there would be tap rooms. So that reporting would be a piece of that. So really detailed reporting on status and trends of wetlands moving forward. This is a picture of a dam removal that was completed by Vermont Natural Resources Council. I was the project manager of this past summer in Shrewsbury. It's a headwater wetland on a tributary of the Mill River. And it's a drone image, post drawdown before we actually removed. So it was an earthen dam that was 300 feet long. It was built in the 1950s by NRCS for water supply and fire suppression for the town of Shrewsbury. That it was no longer being used in either of those capacities, and it was above Northam Road, which was a town road that was, so it had, and there was a house below it, so it actually was a significant hazard dam that if it was failing, there was like basically the earthen embankment was eroding. And if it failed, it would cause infrastructure damage and potentially impacts to the house below. So there was an emergency drawdown done, and then the dam was removed. But this picture just shows the headwater wetland and all of the spring seeds that are feeding this tributary. And when you remove the impoundment and the water that's submersing this whole ecosystem, how it returns and responds so quickly. So I just wanted to share that.
How long did it take it to turn green?
It took it 9 months, not even. The dam is, you can see the outlet here. So the dam was along that, so it was also trees had grown along the dam, so that was part of the failing of the dam. It's just that allowing trees to grow. Don't really want to allow trees to grow on your dam if you're trying to maintain it.
Was the dam that whole right? At right line there, the right,
Yes, this angle here.
yeah.
Yeah.
And what is it, is it something like moss or?
It's just grass that's coming back, yeah, wetland, well, different variety of perennials and wetland forests.
Can you walk in that or is it
You can,
soft?
and if there's plants, so there's a lot of trees already coming up in this location. So this is the second year post drawdown. And with the dam removal, we actually didn't have to disturb a lot of the vegetation there, so. It's looking really good and you can walk out there.
That will be forested in 100 years,
I hope so.
25 years.
It's allowed to be restored naturally, it will revert back to forest. So now a little bit about dam river science. And thinking about, so Michael mentioned that there's over 1,000 dams in Vermont. Many of those dams are derelict dams and aging dams, and we need to, if they're not serving a useful purpose, we need to remove them. They degrade water quality, they impact aquatic habitat, they restrict the movement of fish and wildlife, they're a liability, a public safety hazard, and they impact water quality. Since the mid-1990s, Vermont has removed, physically removed 64 dams. So that's a good track record. And this just shows a little bit about the river continuum. So this is the concept of how a dam changes a river system. And I spoke to this earlier, but I think this is a good visual of that river continuum concept. So when you put a barrier in a free-flowing river system, the amount of sediment that builds up behind that dam causes the change in temperature. It basically changes the ecosystem from a river system to a lake-like system behind the dam, behind the impoundment. And when you change a river to a lake, you get warm water fish species versus cold water fish species. Vermont streams are known for their cold water fish species. So if we're in a river system, we want to support that system that's been there for 10,000 years, not the system since European settlement of having the dam and the warm water fish species. So this is just sort of, and that river continuum concept is dependent on biota, so living things, flowing and habitat. And it's that cycle of biota, flow and habitat.
Can I just check in?
Timing,
I'm just trying to. Looking at this, notes to see how long you think the presentation is, so we have 20 minutes left.
I'll make that tight,
Alright,
and
well,
if more time is needed, I'll request more time.
okay, great, well. Again, it's day one, so we're going a little fast, but to get a broad introduction.
no,
This
No.
legal rate,
thank you for that reminder. I have this slide, 2 more slides and I'll be really fast. So then the concerns with dams, and I think Michael did a good job going over the policy, is public safety. The fact that they exacerbate flooding, so those derelict dams, if they're not managed for flood control and we're not removing the sediment behind them. The raising of the sediment behind the dam raises the river channel, which exacerbates that flooding. And the loss of river function, riparian function, floodplain function, wetland function, when we have a dam, so it fragments that system and blocks that connectivity. The water quality issue, that it warms that water up, we talked about biodiversity, the economic burdens, and then that we need capacity to manage this. This is the Dog River in Northfield, Cross Brothers Dam, which is proposed for removal. And I just wanted to show the simulation of with the dam removed, so it hasn't been removed yet, but this is. And this dam, if we are able to take this dam out, it's waiting FEMA funding. It will lower, it's estimated with the preliminary engineering design that it will lower. The 100-year flood elevation by 2 feet for 10 houses in Northfield, which is substantial. It's when I think Lauren mentioned in her last testimony that, you know, you can spend 2 million on buying out 3 homes, or you can spend $500,000 to remove a dam and potentially save 10 homes. So the policy that we went over earlier today is just removing those derelict dams when we can. All the best, safest situation is removing a dam if it's not being used. And those dams that are remaining, make sure they're routinely inspected and safely maintained. The unsafe dam petition would allow an easier way to petition to remove a dam or to repair a dam. The inspection of dams, the dam safety revolving loan fund, which we hope would be a forgivable loan for those dams that are following through with removal. And then that transfer of liability from the negligence to the strict liability. And I'll leave you with this cartoon by Tim Newcomb, Free Vermont Rivers. Legislative action is needed now more than ever to remove unnecessary and abandoned dams and make our rivers and wetlands more resilient with our communities and our communities safe. Thank you.
Sure, we'll be asking you more questions in the week. Thanks, Monday. And batting cleanup for day one. There you go. Hello.
This must be Chris, he did such a good job at cleanup capacity. It feels a lot like last time when I was going last and gonna speed through, it's like.
So, you know,
Yeah.
I'm retired, so I don't want you being squeezed twice over here. So, I would say. Present as you like, and we'll schedule follow-on time next week.
I appreciate that. Can you stop your swim chair?
I did. Maybe it's okay, hold on. Yeah, there's just a delay.
Share mine in a moment. Good still morning, committee. My name is Lauren Oates. I'm the Director of External Affairs with the Nature Conservancy in Vermont. I know that I was here a month ago today, and so some of my testimony might be a bit redundant to the senators that were here, I confess. But there are a couple of points I do wanna make with senators that weren't. Namely the introduction of myself with a little bit of like resume flair, just to provide a bit by way of acknowledgement of how much I've been involved in and working on this space. Prior to, well, actually, even before joining it, while I was at the Nature Conservancy in the last 3 years, I served as the member on the Climate Council with subject matter expertise in natural hazard resilience. Prior to joining the Nature Conservancy, I was the Vermont State Hazard Mitigation Officer with Vermont Emergency Management for 6 years. And prior to joining Vermont Emergency Management, I moved to Vermont to help the town of Waterbury with their flood recovery efforts. So I've been doing this for a long time. And I'm really, really pleased to see S213 before us today. A lot of the plans and programs I'll get into in a moment have been calling on this action for quite some time, so it's great to see it in ink, even if it's draft. So it's been exactly 1 month since I was here in this room talking to you about flooding. And in that month, perhaps unsurprisingly, given the year we had another flood. In late December, which is fairly uncharacteristic, but perhaps not unexpected given our changing climate. During that flood event, we had several of our major rivers yet again reach major flood stage just before the holidays. I'm going to share my screen. I tried to come up with a couple of images while I heard questions today, so it's really drafty, but here. We talked a lot about floodplains, river corridors, riparian areas, wetlands. I'm here mostly just to speak to the river corridor and riparian area section of S213. Karina just spoke really eloquently to wetlands and dams, so I don't have to, which is great. But because we're talking about the interconnectedness of the aquatic system, just wanted to pull this up to kind of show what it is that we're talking about when we talk about these different areas. And it does have a little bit of like floodplains, river corridors, riparian areas and bears, a my feel to it, but floodplains, and Mr. O'Grady spoke to this too, floodplains are those areas where we see inundation flooding. That's the y-axis flooding, the slow rise and slow fall of water, it's what we see when we see Montpelier flood. Whereas river corridor flooding is that x-axis flooding, when a river charts a new course entirely. I'll go back to that in a second, but this is an image or a graphic of the change in the third bench of the White River over time, and that is meandering of a river. That is a natural, necessary process that a lot of our development and historic settlement pattern has prevented, creating significant flood risk and vulnerability that we've seen exacerbated over time. So each of these parts of our river system have been heavily impacted by development and our historic settlement pattern. 75% of Vermont's rivers are disconnected from their floodplain, which has in turn led to increased flood vulnerability, deteriorated water quality, biodiversity loss, and myriad other issues. Like I said, I'm here to speak to the development and river corridors section of the bill, which starts on line 18, page 10, and runs through line 10 of page 15, so it's rather short but important. Specifically, this language is in recognition of a handful of state plans that have unanimously recommended protection of river corridors, floodplains, and riparian areas as a flood resilience and water quality strategy for the state. This is the moment to wipe the dust off those plans and enact the legislation that we know that we need in this time. Well, as with last time, but I'll do it again, I'm gonna hand out a quick sheet that will also be on the website to you all that show you all of the plans that address this. And if you're okay with me going through a little bit, I won't read it line by line, but I just want to acknowledge the 2021 Vermont Climate Assessment from the University of Vermont has said that river corridor and floodplain protections are the least costly opportunity to avoid the loss of existing floodplain functions and associated heightened damages. The 2021 Vermont Climate Action Plan, which has a specific action that is essentially the river corridor section of 213, is to adopt legislation to authorize the Agency of Natural Resources to revise the existing flood hazard area and river corridor rule to incorporate statewide jurisdiction and permitting authority for river corridors for all kinds of development. I do want to acknowledge that that received unanimous support from all 21 members of the County Council when it went up for discussion. The 2023 and previous 2018 State Hazard Mitigation Plan both discuss river corridor protection as a priority strategy. The 2016 Lake Champlain TMDL, Total Maximum Daily Load Implementation Plan, has a quote: "With respect to implementing the Lake Champlain TMDL, the current river corridor and floodplain protection program is limited in the following areas. Development and floodplains and river corridors falling outside of state jurisdiction are not currently regulated, and yet is the most effective form of stream and riparian restoration and reduction of the existing load." The 2017 Forest Action Plan says development in flood-prone areas is likely to be significantly exacerbated due to increased flooding impacts. And finally, Vermont Conservation Design, which was recently elevated and prioritized through Act 59 last session, indicates that although riparian areas and river corridors are highly altered by agricultural growth and urbanization, the risk of flooding these areas serves as a natural deterrent for future development. A natural deterrent is an insufficient means for approaching development in a state. Let's go to.
It hasn't had. It's quite as much of a deterrent effect as one might think.
Not at all.
Probably not.
Not at all, probably not. I heard Senator White say she likes maps, I would like to see one. I went ahead and pulled up that wall for those that are familiar with that at the table. This is pulled from the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources Atlas. I use Google Chrome, so it works for me. And I just want to highlight that the red area is the floodplain and that yellowish cream area is the river corridor. So there is significant overlap in certain areas of the state. And there are certain areas where a place is a river corridor, it is not a floodplain. And again, the risks associated with them are vastly different. 75% of all damages in Vermont due to flooding are due to that erosion flooding, not inundation flooding.
Sorry, what percentage?
So 75. And then this is the only image that I have before I came, if you want to pass them around, just to show you, here's the difference. I heard Senator, I think that you already mentioned Route 4, here's an image of Route 4 following Tropical Storm Irene. And underneath it, a house that was completely obliterated by the river in Rochester. This is erosion damage. This is high velocity, high public safety concern flooding. The inundation flooding that you see on the right, yes, that's Waterbury from the July 2023 flood. And the image underneath it is just a high water mark, obviously on a very sunny, dry day, down in the Royalton area, yep. And so that's again, that floodplain flooding, so these are the two, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Correct. Looking at the clock, I'm gonna keep moving forward. Mr. O'Grady said that you're gonna need to convince a lot of people of this bill. And I'm here to convince you all so that you can then convince them. I think it's pretty bulletproof. And here's why. First and foremost, Mr. Campany mentioned this is about public safety. We've inherited our historic settlement patterns from those that came before us. And climate change is exacerbating the issues those settlement patterns pose. And still, we make decisions, we must make decisions and must make them soon before the next guaranteed flood hits. That's an exact statement that I made last time, and a guaranteed flood did indeed hit between the 3 or 4 weeks that I was last here. To the equitability piece, 4% of Vermont's single family homes are located in the floodplain. 4, whereas 12% of mobile homes located in mobile home parks are located in the floodplain. That's a 3-fold increase. For Vermonters who are generally less fiscally able to recover from a devastating flood event. Last time I was here, I referenced the University of Vermont study that found that the bottom quartile of earners in the Lewis Creek watershed incurred more than 90% of damages from flooding. Flood exposure in Vermont is inequitable.
Which quartile?
The bottom quartile
Oh.
occurs more than 90% of earners in the Lewis Creek watershed. income earners, the bottom percent, so the bottom 20%.
Poor people get flooded a lot.
A lot more,
Yeah,
And
because
Well,
that is the cheap area to
well, it's-
develop.
gonna ask, you gave us some statistics on who supported Bill. Who do you list as opponents of the bill? Perhaps we can think about that and share with us who we can expect to be opposed to this bill.
I would. Ideally, by the end of this, it would be really hard for anybody to say that they would be opposed to it.
Oh, it's gonna be, it'll be easy
No, I know.
and they'll be lined up.
And I
Who
would
would
tell
you
you,
predict?
it would be developers who want to continue to develop in these high hazard areas.
yeah.
And I can tell you all about how it is fiscally irresponsible for the state of Vermont to continue to allow development in these high hazard areas. I can tell you that it's a public safety threat for the state of Vermont to continue to allow development in these high hazard areas. I can tell you that it is significantly exacerbating our water quality issues in the state. It is closing state beaches, it is closing public beaches, private beaches because of water quality issues. It is a interconnected problem that requires attention. And that requires just implementing what the state has already said we need to do year after year after year after year.
Why haven't we done, who's opposing it?
We
Our
have,
constituents.
Pardon?
Our
I think it's
constituents.
different. I think.
I
Which
heard,
ones?
so I heard a mention of the shoreline.
Yes.
I heard a mention of the Shoreline Protection Act and how there was significant opposition to that, largely from landowners, private property rights. That was largely more an aesthetic issue. This is a public safety issue. If you look at this image again from Rochester. If your neighbor builds an ADU in the river corridor and you live downstream from them.
Oh.
Your house might get taken out by their ADU. This is a problem. That is not only a next door neighbor, it is a cross-town, cross-jurisdictional problem, I think. Chris Campany called it intermunicipal, which is a beautiful word, which I should have used. So anyway. It's inequitable because of who is living in these high hazard areas. It is inequitable because we have left it to our towns to manage this. I have a whole litany of reasons for why that's inequitable. You've heard it from Mr. O'Grady and Mr. Campany. I think Mr. O'Grady said the municipalities don't have that final regulatory column and the gaps have significant implications. Let's see, I do feel like I am starting to rush and I hear a bell, so how do you propose that I wrap? I can just kind of, I'll just end on,
Well, here's
it's
what
a public safety problem, and I can talk next time about how much money it's costing taxpayers.
we can wrap this by promising to come back next week.
Okay, yay, thank you.
I wanna hear more.
Yeah, well,
Alright,
I'll bring more hats.
yeah, we're visual learners in this committee, I know.
I am too.
Alright,
Alright,
so thank
Thank
you so
you.
much, appreciate your flexibility, and thank you everyone for a great first day on the bill, we are adjourned.
thanks,
Thank you.
Well done.
thanks.